Hello everyone, I am Neelam Vishnu. Today in this video, we will understand the comparison between fundamental rights and directive principle of state policy as mentioned in the Indian Constitution. The content of this presentation will be as follows. First, we will understand the definition of the fundamental rights and DPSPs as specified by the Constitution of India. Next, we look at the comparison between fundamental rights and DPSPs on the below criteria, meaning and definition, adaptation sources, nature and justiciability, objective and purpose, consequences of violation, suspension, amenability. Finally, we close out with the conclusion remarks. Let's begin with what are the fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are basic human rights guaranteed to all individuals by the Constitution of India. These are guaranteed under Part 3, Article 15 to 35. They ensure freedom, equality, and dignity of individuals and protect them from government actions. The power of fundamental rights is also reflected by the fact that a person can directly approach the Supreme Court of India under Article 32 of the Constitution of India. Part 3 of the Constitution of India specifies the below fundamental rights guaranteed to the citizen of India. Right to equality. Article 14 to 18 is one of the important fundamental rights of the Indian Constitution that ensures equal protection before the law, abolishes untouchability, and right to freedom. Article 19 to 22. Freedom is one of the important ideals cherished by any democratic society. The right to freedom include freedom of speech, expression, assembly, association, practice any professions or reside in any part of the country. Right against exploitation. Article 23 to 24. This right implies the prohibition of traffic in human forced labor as provided under Article 24. Right against exploitation restricts the employment of children below the age of 14 years in hazardous environments like factories and mines. Right to freedom of religion. Article 25 to 28. The Constitution of India guarantees the right to practice and propagate any religion to not only individuals but also religious groups in India. Under Article 25, these rights remain applicable as long as public morality, decency, health, and other reasonable measures are not affected. Cultural and educational rights. Article 29 to 30. It safeguards the rights of linguistic and religious minorities and provides them with the right to establish their educational institutes subject to state regulate on educational standard and right to constitutional remedies, Article 32 to 35. The Constitution provides for legal remedies for the protection of these rights against their violation by the state or other institutions or individuals. It entitles the citizens of India to move to the Supreme Court of or High Courts for enforcement on these rights. Now that we have studied what are the fundamental rights, let's us try to understand the directive principle of state policy. Directive principle of state policies are the guidelines to be followed by the government while framing policies. The directive principle of state policies are mentioned in Part 4, Article 36 to 51. They ensure social, economic, and political justice and aim to create a welfare state. These directive principles of state policies are classified into three key provisions: socialistic principle, Gandhian principle, liberal intellectual principle. The details about these provisions are as follows. Socialistic principles promote welfare state, ensure equal pay for equal work, protect workers' rights, provide free legal aid, and improve public health. The second one is Gandhian principle. Promote village, panchayat, encourage cottage industries, protect the environment, and prohibit intoxicating substances. The last one is liberal intellectual principles. Ensure uniform civil code, protect historical monuments, and promote international peace. Having understood the definition of fundamental rights and DPSPs, let us try to look at these from a comparative point of view. Here is a comparison based on definition of fundamental rights and directive principle of state policies. Fundamental rights refer to the most basic human rights that government must provide to the citizen of a country, whereas the directive principle of state policies provide certain guidelines to the government which should be followed to achieve social and economic welfare. So in simple terms, fundamental rights provide rights to individuals while DPSPs provide guidelines to the state to ensure economic welfare. In terms of the sources of influence of the fundamental rights and DPSPs, fundamental rights of India have been adapted from the Constitution of United States of America, while directive principle of state policies have been highly inspired by the Irish Constitution. So these were the sources of adaptation of fundamental rights and DPSP. On the basis of nature and justiciability, fundamental rights are justiciable, meaning they can be enforced by the Supreme Court and High Court. That is, if any law violates fundamental rights, court can strike it down, Article 32 and 226. While Directive principle of state policy are non-justiciable, meaning no one can go to court to enforce them, which is why they act as moral and political guidance for lawmakers. So, in summary, the fundamental rights are enforceable, whereas DPSPs are non-enforceable. Let us understand how fundamental rights and DPSPs are distinguished on the basis of their objective and purpose. The fundamental rights aim to protect individual freedom, democracy, and dignity, which are essential for a democracy. On the other hand, DPSPs aim to achieve socio-economic justice and establish an impartial society. The fundamental rights help restrict government power to ensure citizens' rights are not violated, while DPSPs encourage the state to take positive steps for the welfare of citizens. Both fundamental rights and directive principle of state policies serve essential objectives required for smooth functioning of democratic nation. We now we look at what are the consequences in case of violation of these fundamental rights or directive principle of state policies. If the fundamental rights of an individual are violated, then it's considered to be a punishable offense because fundamental rights are enforceable by law. On the other hand, since directive principles of state policies are not enforceable by the law and are mere guidelines, their violation is not an offense and cannot be awarded punishment for their violation. Let us now look at under what circumstances do the fundamental rights and DPSPs are suspended. In state of emergency in the country, all fundamental rights except Article 20 and 21 can be suspended in case of state of emergency, while DPSP cannot be suspended or revoked in any case, not even during state emergency. Since in all circumstances the state should follow these guidelines while making law or enforcing them. Let us look at the comparison of fundamental rights and directive principle of state policies in terms of their amenability as per the Constitution of India. Fundamental rights can be amended but cannot violate the basic structure, whereas DPSPs can be freely amended. An example of amendment of fundamental right is 44th Amendment 1978 removed the right to property as a fundamental right. An example of amendment of DPSPs is the 86th Amendment 2002 made a free education Article 45 a fundamental right under Article 21A. Now that we have studied the comparison between fundamental rights, DPSPs, we make the below conclusion remark. The fundamental rights ensure freedom and individual protection. Directive principle of state policies ensure socio-economic justice and welfare. While fundamental rights are enforceable, DPSPs are guidelines. A balance between fundamental rights and directive principle of state policies is necessary for democracy and development. So this is the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you everyone.